Today, WUVT is interviewing Walt Freese, former CEO of Ben & Jerry's, and Virginia Tech student Daniel Moir about their upcoming lecture as part of Roanoke Indivisible's Education to Empowerment series. Roanoke Indivisible is, quote, a nonpartisan, all-volunteer organization building a mass movement to demand a government and economy that ensures access to opportunity and a better life for all, unquote. Freese's lecture, Making an Activist Business Work for Society and Investors, is the second part of a lecture series including author Michael Santos and 6th District Congressional candidate Beth Macy. My name is Maddox Adkins, and let me welcome you two to Virginia Tech.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, great.
For my first question, why are you uniquely qualified to speak on this topic?
Well, I worked in business my entire career, but I found very early on, as somebody who was interested in philosophy and literature undergrad, that I didn't feel quite in sync working in business without partnering an element that included values. And so I made it the mission during my career, my mission, to find businesses with a deep sense of purpose that also sought to be successful businesses. In other words, marry the two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, who are you guys kind of trying to reach with this lecture? I know that we kind of have both a bunch of students and then obviously a bunch of faculty and a larger community here in Blacksburg. What specifically, what kind of demographics are you trying to reach with this?
I want to reach as many people as possible. And the reason that I say this is that, quite simply, over the course of human history, the most powerful forces in people's lives, starting in the 5th century, would be the church, then the state. The state was about the 1700s through, I would say, 1980, and arguably today, business. And so with that comes a whole new set of responsibilities. The state understood that when that transition took place. But business hasn't yet recognized the responsibilities it has to society. And as a result, I would argue both businesses suffer and society suffers.
Yeah.
So I want anybody who interacts with business in some way, which is virtually all of us, to be engaged and understand a little bit more about the role business plays in our lives.
Yeah, how did both of you sort of get involved with Roanoke Indivisible? I know we have very different perspectives, one being a student and one being someone who's been involved in business and his community. How did both of you sort of get involved?
Oh, I can go first. So I first got into Indivisible I connected with the New River Valley chapter of Indivisible. They are pretty local to the area, and they were looking for a student to hopefully take on a chapter of Virginia Tech. And eventually, after talking with them for a while and hearing about more of what they do, I became very interested in that. I've been looking for an organization that gives me a chance to act on my values in life. One of the reasons I've chosen my major is for my values. I want to be I'm a biological system engineering major. I'm really interested in sustainable agriculture. And so I'm trying to replicate that in all aspects of my life, in my social groups and everything. Another reason is because Indivisible has got a pretty broad reach. I first heard about Indivisible from my aunt in rural New Jersey. So a very similar part of the country in the fact that they're both in the Appalachians, but very far away still. So that's how I got involved, and I'll pass it over to Walt now.
And in my case, I've been a lifelong social and environmental activist, but it was only when I moved from Boulder, Colorado to Roanoke, Virginia about 6 months ago with my wife that I ran into a woman named Tracy DeGroat who was going to bring a movie by Robert Reich called The Last Class to the Grandin Theater in Roanoke. And through the course of trying to secure some tickets to that movie, I met Tracy. I wound up being committed to being the MC of the event before I ever got to Roanoke. And then that very night, I encountered Indivisible and started to talk to people there and got engaged, and I love it.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that you guys kind of have both different perspectives and how Roanoke Indivisible is kind of able to unify all the different demographics of people that sort of live in the New River Valley. I know you guys say that business today must recognize sort of greater responsibilities to be ethical than it has in the past. Why is that specifically?
The reason is that the current system and the way it operates isn't working. It's not working for business, and it's not working for society. So you look today, and again and again and again, starting with the Great Depression and, and as recently as the subprime mortgage debacle, where the government needed to bail out Wall Street and financial institutions, and where the government is very much right now also in terms of taxation has reduced taxes on the wealthiest Americans. And at the same time, it's curtailed the ability of labor to organize. So what you're seeing right now is a concentration of wealth in the top 10% of American households, who account for over 50% of our wealth. And you look at the bottom 20% of Americans, who now only account for the bottom 50% of Americans that account for 12% of our wealth. You start to see these huge disparities. So America is less and less effective in terms of how it works for ordinary citizens. And yet at the same time, it falls prey again and again to the difficulty business has in dealing with major risks that should be identifiable. And I can give you some examples later on. But
yeah, I mean, you could also just currently elaborate on the sort of risks that you see.
So let me just give you, of course, modern day examples. We've got the savings and loan debacle or implosion that was in the 80s. And of course, the government had to go and rescue the savings and loan because they were undercapitalized, meaning they didn't have enough funds on hand to handle the variability in how they were making money. And sometimes they were more successful, sometimes less successful. Less successful, the taxpayers wind up footing the bill. Now, it doesn't work that way for American citizens. It does work that way for business.
Yeah.
So again, we'll see the dot-com bubble. When that burst in 2000, 2001, enormously costly, foreseeable by business, but not acted on. So let me give you a current day example. Okay, there are a couple of very clear risks that business knows about, that society knows about. So for example, if China invades Taiwan, which it's repeatedly said it would do, we will lose somewhere near 90% of the advanced chips being supplied not just to the United States, but also to the Western world. Automatic recession. I mean, we're talking on the scale, probably on the scale of the Great Depression. Is business aware of it? Yes. Did business start to take action 10 years ago to start to prepare for this risk? No. Another one is artificial intelligence. Now, we know tons of money are going into trillions into the building of data centers around the country. But the companies that usually get identified with those data centers, they're not paying for the data centers themselves. They're going to third parties on Wall Street. They're saying, we would like you to finance the building of this data center. And so we're in a position where there's a large amount of debt out there, where it's starting to be packaged just like subprime mortgages were in the in 2008, 2009 period, as something called derivatives, where they bundle up a whole bunch of these debts, and it's hard to tell exactly what you're buying or what you're investing in. Well, if for any reason AI is not adopted by business and consumers as rapidly as the data centers are being built, there's going to be a huge issue. The tech industry knows this.
Oh, yeah.
Wall Street knows this. Are we doing anything to mitigate that risk? We're not. And this is where I mean, so what these things can result in are severe depressions. It affects everyone in the United States. And yet, business isn't stepping up and controlling its risks, because it's a huge risk to these businesses and their shareholders. And the U.S. government isn't stepping up with regulation to require that these risks be managed. So the relationship between democracy and capitalism is broken, but it is yet to be fully recognized.
Yeah. Americans often assume today that democracy and capitalism are a package deal. Do you really think that they're right?
They're not a package deal. And let me start with the founding of our country. 1776, we all know. In 1776, were you to ask the average citizen in what would become the United States what they thought of capitalism, you would get a blank stare. And the reason for that is Adam Smith, who's credited with being the father of capitalism, didn't write his book, The Wealth of Nations, until 1776. So there was no notion at that time. I mean, there were businesses. They were largely smaller scale, more diversified throughout the colonies. But there was no such thing as large corporations. There was no knowledge of capitalism. And then by the time capitalism started to be practiced by businesses in the United States, because we were unsophisticated in these things, we immediately, in very short order, saw the abuse of capitalism at the expense of society. So everybody's familiar with the term the robber barons. So we're talking about the late 1800s, maybe early 1900s. The robber barons during the Gilded Age were really people who, they weren't just hugely successful business people. they were business people who basically controlled entire industries. So you had people like John D. Rockefeller and controlling the oil industry in the United States. You had the Vanderbilts controlling railroads. You had Carnegie controlling steel. You had J.P. Morgan controlling the banks. And so we saw this unprecedented accumulation of wealth. We saw labor start to be victimized. We saw farmers who were caught between the railroads that dictated how much money it was going to cost for them to ship their products to, for sale to market. They were caught by the banks because in that time between when they shipped their products for sale and they received payment for that sale, they needed to borrow money to tide themselves over. So everywhere the system was controlled for them, except they had no control. So for good reason, from very early on, Americans looked with a great degree of distrust at capitalism and at business in general. And that's why you had Teddy Roosevelt. One of his many nicknames was the Trust Buster. Mm-hmm. But he went in and actually broke up the monopolies. So we had the first laws starting to regulate monopolies against the abuses of capitalism. We started to see government serve as a neutral arbiter between business and labor, because there wasn't a trust that it was going to be fair and equitable if it was done any other way. And then when that was shortly followed in 1929 by the Great Depression, this went on for, if you could pick, for a 10-year period at least, for all of the 1930s. That's how bad the Depression was. And that's when you start to see increased regulation of business. You see the Securities and Exchange Commission. You see consumer protection laws. You see bank insurance, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. You see all of these things. You see laws supporting the formation of unions. You see the first minimum wage. This is all under FDR. So constantly what we're seeing in these situations is business is failing society. Government needs to step in and regulate business. And so throughout most of our history, what we've seen is Americans having a distrust of a distrust of business and financial institutions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you guys are trying to support a lot of different causes with Roanoke Indivisible. Because it's difficult to consistently support so many diverse issues and causes systemically, what causes do you think are the most important to sort of first support? Why?
Personally, I would say, and I'm not speaking for Roanoke Indivisible when I say this, first of all will be protecting democracy in America. And and that means in all forms. And it's been written about. People have talked about it extensively. That democracy right now, certainly if you look at the relationship between the federal government, the administration, Congress, and the Supreme Court, we've never seen the kinds of strains on the balance of powers intended in the Constitution that we have today. And I do think that I will say as an aside, I think it's really important to talk about. This is not a polarized left or right issue, because when you get right down to it, the real issue, there are a lot of distractions right now, and there's a lot going on. But the biggest issue is the concentration of wealth in the hands of a few, and the rest of America struggling to make life work. And so, of course, when we talk about, in the U.S. government, like we the people, it's no longer about we the people. Somehow we've been lost in the shuffle. And I think that's the core issue. Everything else that we're seeing is a byproduct of reaction to the current state of affairs. How our lives feel to us.
Yeah, I love that response. In addition to sort of more of the practical aspect of improving a business and making it more ethical, what are some of the hardest production struggles you have faced when it comes to being more ethical?
One is, in order for it to happen, it really takes a concerted effort. It's not something that you come into a company and say, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to focus on these values, and we're going to do it in balance. So at Ben & Jerry's, we had a social and environmental mission. We had a product mission that was to make the best ice cream money can buy. And we had a financial mission, which was to deliver a fair return to our shareholders. So you couldn't just walk in and say to employees, okay, this is the way it's going to be from now on. Because in order for it to work, to really work for everyone, you need to create a strong values-based culture that understands the role that all three of these elements play. So if people in the company aren't passionate about the values and see it as part of who they want to be in the world, if they don't take seriously our guidelines that say if anybody sees a risk to quality in the company, while products being produced, you have the right and ability to stop production. And nor do you get any passion for how profitable you are, how successful you are financially. Because to do that, people really need to see the relationship between, hey, if we are more successful as a business, not only do we fulfill our mission, but we also can reach a larger and larger audience with our values. And I'm not just talking about espousing values. I'm talking about advocating values, being an activist brand, taking on issues that most businesses wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah, absolutely. Why are you sort of so sure that this socially responsible model of business can actually succeed?
Because I have seen it consistently outperform what I would call ordinary business. So I have to say, I mean, I went to business school.
Mm-hmm.
I received exceptional training, not just in business school, but also in the companies that I first joined when I got out of business school. So I understand how to run a business. But one misconception that people have is that, oh, values-led business, it's like the softer side of business. You know, it's for these Birkenstock-wearing hippies and, you know, it's like, and then there's serious business. Well, let me tell you this. It's a values-led business needs to do everything a regular business does and more, not less. I mean, it's easy if you could just stop at the bottom line. But I'll tell you this, once you engage the head, heart, and souls of a community and view each other as we instead of management and employees or, you know, any type of hierarchical structure, what you unleash are passions in people where it doesn't feel like you're going to work anymore. And what that does, the magic of that, is it allows them to live a life that they feel is consistent with who they want to be in the world. They don't have to check any part of themselves at the door when they come in to work in this business. But what it also does is these passionate people also do a much better job of actually producing a rapidly growing, highly profitable business. And I can tell you later about the before and after when I got to Ben & Jerry's in just as one example of how this works.
Yeah, I mean, you should go on. Just tell me more about sort of the concrete examples you've seen with sort of improving the business as you see it.
I'd be happy to. So, first of all, I want to give all credit to Ben and Jerry.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they are two of the most amazing people I ever met. They came up with this concept of values-led business. They founded the first one in the United States, the second in the world, back in 1978. They invented the three-part mission statement because they were horrified when their ice cream started to sell that somebody referred to them as businessmen, because they said, and you had to be there in the 70s. I was, you weren't. But, their attitude was, oh my God, business is responsible for so many of the ills in our society. We can't be businessmen. So either we need to redefine what business means or we need to get out of this business. That was literally the discussion. So that's the first thing I want to give credit to. But I do want to say Ben & Jerry's was very successful as a business, but all of a sudden in the late 90s, Ben and Jerry, and the board of directors made a hiring decision for a CEO that they would say, if they were here, was a mistake. You know, it was somebody who didn't share their values. He was a very skilled business person, but he didn't share their values. And what you saw was the business, the growth started to slow. The profitability started to decline. And the expression of the values, of course, wasn't being actively put out there in the world because there was no belief in them. So when I came on board in 2001, Ben & Jerry's wasn't growing at all, 0% growth. It had an operating profit margin of just 3%. Now, to put that in reference, In the ice cream business, the average in the U.S. and globally is about 10%. So Ben & Jerry's was not doing well.
Yeah.
Financially, its values were suffering. And I came in, and it took me a while, decades of experience to finally learn that when I came in, the most important things I wanted to address were Ben & Jerry's social and environmental values and put them to work in the world. Because I believed in this ever since I was in high school, so this was like my dream come true.
Yeah.
And I also knew it was critical to create and kind of nurture the culture. And this is where my role was more that of an enabler. You don't change a culture by yourself. That has to be that has to be done on the part of all the members of that culture, and that requires an incredible degree of discussion, two-way communication, and buy-in. So I knew those were the two things, but I knew those would take time. Starting to get the social mission to actually effectively work out there, I knew would take about 9 months. Starting to change the culture, I knew would be a matter of 2 or 3 years to get all the way to Bright. So I did the things. So while I was working on those, what I started to focus on are just business fundamentals. Things like, let's focus on improving our gross margin. So let's stop selling products that we actually lose money on every time they're sold. Let's think about how many plants we need, how many distribution centers we need to make sure that we're spending our money the right way. But if we make any changes, we do it in a Ben & Jerry's way. So it turned out there was one plant we decided it was right to sell for the overall business. But in order to do that, and this was in Springfield, Vermont, we had to say to our employees in Springfield, okay, how many people think it's so important to live here in Springfield that they would like us, when we sell the company, to make sure that whoever buys it maintains your employment here in Springfield. And this was amazing to me, coming out of more of a business school mindset. It was amazing to me, but about 70% of the people said, I want to work in Springfield, Vermont. It's something unique about Vermont and in some of the smaller, more rural areas of our country. So they stayed in Springfield, Vermont, which was selected, by the way, to be the actual hometown of the Simpsons. So if you're wondering about which Springfield is really Springfield, it's that. And we gave everybody else the option to go to work at one of our other 2 plants in Vermont. So we made sure everybody was taken care of. Nobody was going to lose. And we found a buyer that was willing to hire Ben & Jerry's employees. So anyway, we were working on the business fundamentals. So it's not like we're the softer side of business and not doing those things. But what really turbocharged the business was when the values were put to work in the world, when the culture was one of we and passion and collective sharing, and we went out of our way to make sure there was two-way dialogue all the time in Ben & Jerry's. And I would know the names of everybody that worked in our South Burlington office, and they would know me, and I'd put my office right in the middle of the building to make myself as accessible as possible. But So here's the difference. I told you where we started out.
Mm-hmm.
No growth, marginally profitable. We get to the point where we are, during this period, we expand globally. We become the fastest growing ice cream brand in the world. Our operating profit margin, remember, was down to 3%. Normal was 10%. We were at 20%. So nobody was complaining about whether we were a successful business.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you this, we could not have been that successful if it wasn't for the other two elements of the mission statement and the culture. And so one of the things business is missing right now is, and this is why I like calling it sometimes conscious capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like waking up that there's an ability to do business in a way that not only makes your financial returns better, but makes society better. So I can talk later on about the kinds of things that happen, what we put out there in the world to create the kind of change we wanted to see and how it benefited society and the environment. But had we not done those things, I don't think the rest of the success would have been there.
Yeah, absolutely. If the results are, what do you think will happen if business doesn't recognize it has greater responsibilities and sort of continues down the path that it's on, that you've sort of demonstrated that is kind of having disastrous consequences for the economy and working people?
Right. Well, I think, of course, the majority of citizens in the United States are going to suffer, and things will only get worse if they're not addressed, not better. Right now, we're approaching a concentration of wealth that we haven't seen since the days of the robber barons. Mm-hmm. And we're doing it with, the robber barons weren't taxed. They were able to create monopolies. I mean, today, the wealthiest Americans are taxed to, let's say, a relatively harmless degree. Mm-hmm. Since the 1970s, there and deregulation and the cutting back of taxes for corporations and the wealthiest Americans, we've actually seen more of the tax burden shift to that mid-income and lower income group. And there's no sign of that changing, particularly not today. I will tell you this. I was going to pose that as a question, but that's unfair. If anybody listening to this wants to take a guess, how many billionaires currently hold high-level positions in the Trump administration at some point during his second term? So basically, we're talking just a little more than a year. Mm-hmm. I don't think most people would guess this. It's 12.
Wow.
And that does not include President Trump. Mm-hmm. So if you really wonder who's running America, you don't need to look any further than what's going on in the administration. Mm-hmm. You don't have to look any further than the fact that Elon Musk brags that it was his personal wealth that was responsible for Donald Trump becoming president. Because we all like to believe that we're immune to advertising. But I'll tell you this, after 40 years in business, we like to think so, we're not. If you hear one message 90% of the time, and another message 10% of the time, unless you are consciously offsetting that by digging deeper and doing all the research, you're going to start to believe what you hear 90% of the time. It just works that way. So I think if this continues, there will be a point where it's no longer sustainable. There will be a point when the American public is no longer distracted by, today we want Greenland. Right now it's Venezuela, and we really want Maduro out of office. But, we've got Maduro out of office and we want to stop the drug. No, it's not really the drugs, it's the oil. We really want their oil. And then we go to, what about Iran? That's so much of this, and I will tell you my own personal belief about this. It's real, it's happening, it's also a distraction. Because what it stops people from talking about is income inequality. What it stops people from talking about is the fact that most Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. It distracts from the discussion of what do we need to do differently as a society in order to serve all the people and not a select few. And so I think if this continues, at some point, hopefully, we'll stop pointing fingers at each other and start focusing on this very real problem. And business plays a central role in this, but so do we as American citizens. And if we're going to fix America for everyone, we're going to have to take action. I think that's one of the things Roanoke Indivisible Indivisible at Virginia Tech, and so offers to everyone. It's the ability to get engaged, to be heard, to organize, and to start to make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like that answer. For your lecture, what are you hoping students will learn from your talk this Tuesday? What do you really want them to take away from this?
Well, I'm hoping that they take away an understanding of a couple of things. First of all, that democracy and capitalism are not necessarily joined at the hip. That didn't happen, by the way, until 1945, and it happened because the biggest threat coming out of World War II at the end of the war was communism and Joseph Stalin. Well, if the communists were against capitalism, we were a democracy, so we had to be for capitalism. It was only at that point that democracy and capitalism started to hold hands. And what initially began pretty innocuously became more and more toxic. So that's one thing I want them to understand. Second thing I want them to understand is the role that business plays in our society, and why it's arguably become the most powerful force in people's lives today. And really, and I'll go through this in my talk, when you look at the things that business now controls in our society, and I'm talking particularly about the United States and developed Western nations, what you see is that business really controls, business and the wealthiest individuals, the majority of the most important decisions in our society. It's not always overt, but I'll explain why that is. And we'll also talk about socially responsible business and a model, because I'm sure there'll be some people there from the business school. I know one of our sponsors, Virginia Tech Seed. It's funny. I say Vermont only because, of course, I lived in Vermont for Ben and Jerry's for a very long period of time. So I was used to seeing VT until getting to know Virginia Tech, and it was automatically Vermont to me. So, but people from the Virginia Tech Business School will no doubt be there. And I want them to think about business in a broader context, in a different way than perhaps they've been taught. And I want them to have an opportunity to challenge me, and I want to be able to challenge them.
Yeah, absolutely. WUVT News will also be there recording the lecture and hoping that other students will be able to sort of figure it out and get that information if they aren't able to attend. This is a question for our student, David. Mm-hmm. What made you want to start an Indivisible chapter here at Virginia Tech? What really inspired you?
Yeah, so it's really easy to look out and see all the problems in the world, and it can be very natural as a response to kind of look away and be like, okay, I'm going to focus on what I can do at least to improve my current life. I talked to my dad about this a lot. He's like, well, if I can't solve all the problems of the world, at least I can provide for my family. At least I can be a good dad, things like that. And those are all great. But at a certain point, being young, not being attached to too much in life yet, I've been looking for this place where I can address the problems of the world as best I can. There's only so much I can do. But Indivisible at Virginia Tech has become my way of, and a lot of other people's way, our Indivisible community's way of addressing the needs from a student perspective. So we like to focus on education, and we're in a place where there's a lot of learning around here. There's a lot of really smart people doing a lot of really interesting things. We're in a unique place where we can learn a lot and be empowered to take smart action based on that. So.
Yeah, absolutely. This will be our final main question. For both of you, what is the most important piece of advice you can give to students, business, and not alike, about keeping ethical in terms of their sort of daily practice?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so, excuse me, sorry. The perspective I look at it from is, like Walt, I'm interested in philosophy, and I look at what kind of person do I want to be in this world? Like, who am I right now, and who do I want to be? And I think the best way to be ethical and to focus on improving the world is looking at who it is you want to be and trying to take actions to be that. Because I truly think in our hearts we're all good people, and we all want what's best for ourselves and for the world. And I'm hoping people can look inside themselves and be like, hey, this is what I want to do. This is how I see myself fitting into this world, and this is the beautiful things I can create and I can give. I think that's the best advice I can give.
Yeah, what about you, Walt?
I'd say maybe the most important piece of advice that I could give students is not only to be true to yourself and true to your values, but be introspective, look at your values, look at your beliefs and where they come from, and decide whether you, in the process of just questioning those things, is there anything that, with a little contemplation, that you would think or believe differently to create a better world. So it's not just for yourself, but it's also for other people. And then out there in the world, what I would say is err on the side of asking why. Just because something exists, or just because something is being taught right now, doesn't mean that it's the last word. doesn't mean that it's absolute truth. And I think if you do that, you'll get a pretty clear sense of what's really going on. Not what am I being told is going on, but what's really happening, and how do I choose to address it in the world. That may be on your own, it may be through organizations like Indivisible, it may be through all these terrific organizations, and educational departments at Virginia Tech. But you'll make more conscious choices, and you'll lead a more fulfilled life.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for coming on the show. I think that that's all the time that we have for today. Thank you. I hope that you guys have a great time with your lecture and your great time on campus.
Thank you, Max.
Thank you, too.